Today on Cryptic Mass Guitar, we take a look at the difference between the Gibson USA SG Standard 61 with Maestro Vibrola and the Gibson Custom 1964 SG Standard VOS. Alright, so that sound sample that you just heard there is the only sound sample that you're going to hear in this video. I'm going to be doing a sound comparison video like the ones that I always do between both of these guitars, but it'll be at a later date, so probably in about 2 or 3 weeks you should be able to see it. This is just talking about the differences, so like the spec differences, the design differences and stuff like that as well. And to the one guy that's only clicking on this video to leave the comment of, there is no difference. They're both the exact same. Thank you. You're an idiot, but thank you. It's always funny seeing those comments. And because we're talking about an expensive guitar versus a more expensive guitar, people sort of get uncomfortable with the fact that there's money involved in these guitars, I guess. And they sort of feel like, for some reason, the person making the video is trying to push them to buy the most expensive one, to, seem that like, you're more important if you own the more expensive one. That's not the case here. I've had paper thin budgets for guitars, and I've had, what I have now today, which is not paper thin. And I've always found guitars that I've bonded with that have made me want to pick them up and continue to play. And that's the whole goal here. So if you have the Epiphone version and you love that and it continuously makes you want to pick it up, that's all that matters. You don't need the Gibson USA. You don't need the Gibson Custom. You're not more important because you spent more money on a guitar. I'm not more important because I own this. Well, I own this as well, but I'm not more important. It doesn't matter. I'm not a dentist either. But if you were to go back in time and you were to speak with 12 to 13-year-old Ryan, who owned a $300 used Ibanez Pro Series or Pro Rocker V, which was dubbed as a Flying V at the time, and you were to tell him that that is not the best guitar that was ever made, I would have straight up punched you in the face or died trying, because I completely bonded with that guitar back then. It wouldn't work for me today because my tastes have changed, what I look for in a guitar has changed, but that's all that mattered back then. I really bonded with it. I learned a whole heck of a lot with that guitar, and I continuously wanted to pick it up and play with it. So that's the name of the game, guys. Money is great. It gets you certain things, but you can get around with a $300 guitar as long as you really like it. All right, so now that we've got the weird housekeeping things out of the way, and someone's going to accuse me of, some wokeism or something like that, and then, working for Disney's DEI department, let's actually get into the differences here. The first one that we have to talk about is glaringly obvious when you pick them up, but maybe highly overlooked here without picking them up. So this is a 1961, this is a 1964. The body design here would be a 1961 Les Paul Standard, because after 1960, this was the Les Paul design. So from 61 till 63, when Les Paul's contract ran out because he was getting a divorce, this was what you would get if you were buying a Les Paul. You wouldn't get this on it, though. The Maestro Vibrola was like late 62 to early 63 that it came in, and that kind of took over. Prior to that, it was the Sideways Vibrola, and then when that kind of ran its course, somewhere around 62, they had this Vibrola without this plate. It was called the Ebony Block. And then they kind of put the little cover on here, and it became the Maestro Vibrola. So that being said, this has 61 designs to it, which means this is the slim taper neck. It's supposed to be the same slim taper neck that came on the 1960 Les Paul. So that kind of carried over here. So the neck is definitely thinner. The 1964 here is period correct. So that means it has the 64 authentic medium C neck design. So if you were to look at Les Paul necks in the 50s and early 60s, this is more similar to the 1959 Les Paul standard, not the 58, 57, 56, or 54, because those were, or 52, those were a whole heck of a lot thicker design to it. The 59 started to slim things down before the 60 went to the slim taper. So this has similar to the 59 medium C design. The 1964 also would not have been considered a Les Paul. Les Paul's contract ran out at that time because he did not want Mary Ford to make money off of his name when they got their divorce. So whatever. Okay, now with that odd tidbit out of the way, or odd batch of tidbits out of the way, let's talk about the physical differences here spec-wise. So first and foremost, this is a little odd because the Gibson Custom is always a single piece of mahogany for the body, whereas the Gibson USA traditionally is two pieces of mahogany glued together. However, on the Maestro Vibrola, I generally see a single piece of mahogany. Now, I have to note here, Gibson USA is like, they're experts at hiding seams in their guitars. And usually, you know, if you kind of move things and hit it in the right light, you can sort of see the seam. Like if I'm doing this right now, I'm getting some light from over here, and it looks like I have a center seam going up. But if I start to chase that center seam, it sort of disappears halfway up. So this could be two pieces of mahogany, but it looks like a single piece. Usually the telltale sign is right here on the strap button, but when I look, I don't really see the seam going down, and it sort of seems like things are naturally traveling, like the striations and stuff in the wood. And finish-wise, the Gibson USA has a high-gloss nitrocellulose finish, whereas the Gibson Custom, still high-gloss nitrocellulose finish, but it's considered the VOS, so Vintage Original Sheen. That means that this has a lighter application of the nitro finish. Does that matter? It depends on how you sit or play, I guess, with your guitar, and whether or not you do feel certain things when you're playing it. This is honestly for some guitar nerds like myself. Basically, when you start to take away some of the nitro finish, you start to feel a lot more resonance in your body when you're playing it. So resonance, when I say resonance, a lot of people are confused on that. It really pertains to the low end of the guitar. So in your body, you're going to feel a lot more of the low end of the guitar with a VOS finish instead of when you have a high gloss finish, which is one of the reasons why people prefer the satin nitro finish. You get a lot more of the low end feel. The big thing with satin finish is a lot of that like mid-range or the presence or upper mid-range as well sort of disappears from that. you get a lot more that's sort of retained, I guess you would say, when it comes to the gloss finish. So with the VOS finish, you kind of get best of both worlds. You get a lot more of that low end, and you don't lose that presence or the upper mid range that you retain with this. So the VOS, for nerds that sit there and play and go, how do I feel? That's really the difference. Both also have a single piece mahogany neck with rosewood fretboards. Both of them have binding with the fret nibs. However, the VOS here has thinner binding on the fretboard, or over the fretboard. That means they can roll the fretboard a little more, and as well the fret nibs are just a little bit thinner. And something that I always forget to mention here, the Gibson USA has acrylic inlays, whereas the Gibson Custom has aged celluloid nitrate. It's either celluloid or cellulose nitrate. Basically, the inlays are a little different, y'all. When you look at the front of the headstock and you see the inlaid Gibson logo and the inlaid holly leaf, thistle, or crown, people get upset, but they're named different things, and Gibson has called them different things over the years. That's really one place that you'll notice the difference here. So you're going to see that the Gibson USA, that looks a lot more lighter. It's maybe a little silverish, whereas the Gibson Custom looks a little more brown and a little more like golden, I guess you would say, for inlays. Looking on the back of the headstock here is where you're going to find the tuners. Now, the Gibson USA is the Gibson Clouson style single ring vintage deluxe tuners. On the Gibson Custom, you're going to find the double ring Clouson, so not Gibson, Clouson vintage deluxe tuners. A lot of people do kind of question the difference here. The big difference is the Gibson USA is modern sizing, whereas the Gibson Custom is vintage sizing. So that means if you wanted to swap these out for like a more modern, like Grovers or Gotos or Hipshot or whatever people use, you would have to either get vintage sizing for the Gibson Custom shop, or you would have to ream out the holes to make them wider to actually fit the tuner through. You don't have to do that on the Gibson USA. You'd probably just have to drill the pilot holes so you can actually get your screws in the back of the headstock. Next up, we'll take a look at the pickups. So the Gibson USA has the 61R and 61T pickups, which are Alnico 5. They're unpotted. And a lot of people don't know that they're unpotted. They are actually a hotter pickup. There's also a little more focus on the low end and the high end. They're not scooped or anything like that. There's just a little more focus on them. So one thing that I've always noticed with the 61R and 61T, especially for like high gain or anything like that, I kind of have to adjust my amp to offset the more focus on the low end and the high end here. The Gibson Custom has custom buckers, so they're Alnico 3 unpotted pickups. They are, the best way I can describe them is they're not like focused on certain frequencies or anything like that, like the Gibson USA is a 61R and 61T. They're just really well balanced, and there's a sweet top end to them. So it's not something that like, you have to adjust your amp to offset that, or account for the fact that there's a little more high end in it. It's just a sweeter high end. So when you start to play notes and stuff like that, like if you're playing bar chords or what have you, you'll start to notice the a little more accent in the higher strings here than you would with the root notes and stuff like that. The low end focus, there's not really a focus on it. It's just kind of straight away and straightforward. So you don't have to go and adjust your amp because of it. It also means that if you were to play a single note on like the E string, on especially with the neck pickup, you would probably it would be louder on the Gibson USA than it would on the Gibson Custom. So because of that, you would more than likely want to adjust your amp for it. You don't have to do that for the Gibson Custom. But pickups are always just a preference, so the 61R and 61T might work for you more than the custom buckers. Both guitars also have the CTS audio taper potentiometers. Both of them are Gibson branded as well. They are hand soldered. The Gibson USA here has orange drop capacitors. The Gibson Custom has black beauty capacitors, so the Sprague black beauty capacitors. 95% of guitar players out there do not use their capacitors. Capacitors technically do not really properly inject themselves into the signal until you take that tone knob and start dialing it back. When it's set to full blast, they're not really in the signal path. It's kind of closed off from them. So if you're not dialing back your tone, like 95% of guitar players out there, the capacitors do not matter. The capacitors are also a big part of the cost differences here. So orange drop capacitors in Canada, they're about $6 each. That's a lot more expensive than like 15 cents per capacitor, which you can generally get for like the small circular ones. The Sprague Black Beauty in Canada, you can get them cheap, $60 per capacitor if you know a guy and you have to go down an alley. There are, like, the pricing varies on them. It really depends on availability and the time of year and the, lunar cycle and stuff like that. Because in all honesty, I've seen them go from anywhere from $100 to $300 per capacitor, but I also haven't like searched them down like crazy. So you can probably get them for about $60 per capacitor, Canadian, but I've seen them at really high prices. And next up, we'll talk about the bridge. So I'm going to talk about the ABR1 here, because there's a big difference with the 64. A lot more different than just a regular Gibson USA to a Gibson Custom Shop reissue. So generally, if you look at the ABR1 bridge on a Gibson USA, it has a metal doweling system. So that's how it's connected to the body, right? A Gibson Custom, it's drilled directly into the body. So at that point, there's just a little more connectivity to the wood and a little more vibrancy with it. However, with the Gibson USA, we have their steel saddles. I've always kind of not mentioned this because it's hard to track this information down. But the saddles on the ABR1 USA are generally steel saddles, whereas on the Gibson Custom Shop, they're nickel-plated brass. However, on the Gibson Custom Shop 1964, we have nylon saddles. It's the same sort of nylon that's used in the nut. So just on a side note, Gibson Custom Shop nuts here, reissues are nylon. The Gibson USA are Graphtec. So because of the fact that it's a nylon saddle in the ABR1, it's going to change the tonal characteristics just a little bit. A lot of that is just acoustically. So it'll still kind of have a similar feel to it. It might not be as vibrant as the nickel-plated brass, but I find they are quite comfortable on them. And the vibrola. Both of these vibrolas, because I've always heard that the Maestro vibrola never stays in tune, and if you even look at it or have the tusk, the arm itself kind of facing this way and not kind of tucked into the bridge here like this, then it's automatically going to go out of tune. I don't know what's going on here because both of these do not go out of tune. I don't refine them. It's not a Floyd Rose, so I kind of use it like a Bigsby, so I add a little bit of shimmer and shine to things. I add a little bit of warbling from time to time with it, so I'm not using it with dive bombs or anything like that, and these both stay in tune. I tune up to pitch, never down to pitch. and I tug on my strings and stuff like that. So I don't usually have tuning issues, especially on Gibsons. I didn't know about the G string issue until, you know, you go on forums and people say that's why these guitars go out of tune all the time. But if you tune down to pitch and don't tug on your strings and then tune up to pitch afterwards, the moment you start bending or moving these, then they're going to go out of tune. If you tune down to pitch, there's some slack that's around the post, and there's some slack that's caught in the nut. So the moment that you either tug on your string or bend, it's going to go flat. That's physics. From there, we've got a little bit of design differences as well between both of these. So the pick guard on the custom shop is bigger. So it's a bigger pick guard here. If you actually look where the poker chip is here, like the toggle switch cover and everything, it's a lot closer on the Gibson Custom than it is on the Gibson USA. There's a much bigger gap. So the pick guard is a little smaller on the Gibson USA, and that's not a 61 design thing, that's just a Gibson USA thing. The Gibson USA is also a much lighter red than the Gibson Custom Shop. This is because the Gibson Custom Shop uses red aniline dye. So when you're looking at them up close, the red is a whole heck of a lot deeper, and it actually makes the figuring inside the maple sort of pop out a little more, especially when the red aniline dye has those little lighter spots. So it kind of makes it look a little more 3D. And because of that, it makes the carvings on the SG a lot more 3D as well, appear a lot more 3D. The carving of the mahogany body on the Custom Shop is a lot, like, it comes to a thinner point, and it's just more aggressive, the carving in it. And because of the red aniline dye, you notice it a lot more. Whereas the Gibson USA, if you were to look at it in comparison, it does have some aggressive curves here. It comes to a nice point, not as thin as the Custom Shop, but when you look at things, it doesn't look like it's carved as much. And a lot of people, they sort of make a big note of the fact that, oh, the carving goes almost all the way up to the pick guard. But it's a bigger pick guard too, right? So there's certain things that you kind of have to note when you're reading comments online. And another big difference with the body design and the carvings on the body is the back. So when you look at the back and how the body sort of slants towards the neck here, it's a lot more aggressive on the Gibson Custom Shop than it is on the Gibson USA. So looking at the Gibson USA here, it's almost non-existent in comparison to the Gibson USA, to the Gibson Custom. And to the one guy that always asks on SGs about the strap buttons, are they the same strap buttons? They're not. The Gibson USA has more of a mushroom top strap button in comparison to the Gibson Custom Shop, which is definitely a lot smaller. All right, so those are the differences. There are some other ones. This is one I'm going to touch on here really quickly, but those are the main differences between both of these guitars. There's a design difference because they're based on different years. The red aniline dye and the carvings and the capacitors and stuff like that. You could talk about the cases, how they're different, and the case candy. There's a whole heck of a lot more with the Gibson Custom Shop. But to be honest, I only care about the case and the case candy when I'm, waiting for the guitar to come in or waiting to buy the guitar. The moment I get that case and the guitar's out of the case and it's now into a stand, I put the case away and I remember that I have it, but often I forget. But the last thing that I want to bring up when it comes to the USA versus the Custom Shop is the glue that's used. So I want you to put on your tinfoil hat here. And I will explain this by saying when I was younger, the music store that I went to had a little tiny sandwich soup shop. It was like a little table, right? But there would be some older gentlemen, and think here, I'm like 12 or 13 years old. So I'm at that young age where I think old people are crazy when they talk about olden days and make things like they used to. But there's a whole bunch of things that I would always hear when I was, because that sandwich thing was right next to the guitar area. So I would always hear all these different things, and I would think these guys were crazy. But as I got older, I would remember things that they said, and they made sense. So things that I would hear from these older gentlemen were necks. Necks never should be absolutely straight, and you're an idiot if you think that. Those were their words. But I always read, like when I read descriptions from guitars that are being sold online and stuff like straight as an arrow neck. If your neck is straight, you'll probably have, like perfectly straight, you'll probably have buzz around the first or the second fret, or you will get it at that point. It should have a slight bow in that neck to prevent that. That's called neck relief. Next thing I heard was tune up to pitch, never down to pitch. If you tune down to pitch, you're going to get slack around the post, slack around the nut. So the moment you start bending, it's going to start going flat. So you tune up to pitch, tug on your strings, tune up again, and then you're good to go. I do that 3 times when I'm recording, and I don't generally have tuning issues. The other thing that I used to hear is they don't make guitars like they used to. To which I always thought, you guys are nuts. Everyone talks about music these days and this and that and whatever. They would say things like, the old Gibsons, they used to drill directly into the body for the bridge. Now they have this weird thing, and the nuts were different. This was different. That was different. They would say, and they had the pancake body in the 70s when they sold them and stuff like that. But I always used to remember them saying, even the glues they used to use. This is because I remember this because I thought this was the craziest thing I ever heard anyone say. Even the glues that they used were different. The glue that they used to use was hot animal glue or hot hide glue. I used to think they were saying Hyatt or Hyde. I had no idea. But they used to say that glue would actually harden better and it would make it more acoustically louder. I thought they were nuts. And then I think around 2012, 2013, I started reading that online. People saying, hot hide glue or hide glue. It hardens whatever, and then it makes it a little more louder. From there, once the new management for Gibson came in, the custom shop started touting, we use every glue, all the glues for the reissues are hot hide glue. They crystallize, and like Type Bond glue, which is used in the USA guitars, it sort of leaves a little bit of a film there, and there's a separation, whatever. But the hot hide glue crystallizes and it fuses the wood together a little more. So from there, it's a little acoustically louder because of that, and it sort of feels like it's all vibrating as one piece rather than 3 different species of wood, or 2 different species of wood working together. Again, tinfoil hats are on, right? Because there's a lot of different things that go into these guitars that could be affecting that. There were people online that did testing with guitars with hot hide glue, yellow glue, white glue, tight bond, super glue, all of those different things. And they did acoustic testing and stuff like that, and they always varied, and they were never the same guitar. So they were never, like, it's not like they took, 5 Les Pauls with different glue that were constructed the same way, same bridges and stuff like that. So it's all inconclusive. So I don't know specifically because I've never done a made to measure with something with tight bond glue rather than using hot hide glue. So that's just, I'm going off of what I heard of when I was younger, and then what I read, and then what I'm reading now. So take that with whatever grain of salt you will. Just take the tinfoil hats back off now. All right, so that's it. That's all the differences that I want to talk about here between both of these guitars. It's meant to give you a little more in-depth information if you are looking at the USA or the Epiphone or what have you, and you just want to get a little more information because there's a whole heck of a lot of price difference between them. There's a little more handwork, obviously, that goes into the custom shop than the USA. They're both plecked and stuff like that, but those are the main differences. So no body binding. That's obviously why there's it's not more expensive like a Les Paul, and it's just mahogany rather than mahogany with a carved maple top. So there you go. Hopefully it was helpful. Hopefully you get a little more information, and as always, try the guitars out for yourself and buy which one actually works for you. Just ignore the pricing. You're not more important when you buy a custom shop than if you have a Gibson USA. Thanks for watching.